Good morning there, faithful listeners. It is Jen here with P40ministries.com. So we are in, Genesis chapter 17 today. We're going to finish out the chapter and read 15 through 27. Now, if you didn't listen to Monday's episode, go back and do that first just so that you're caught up and you know exactly what is happening. And even listening to Friday's episode would be good for this one as well. So make sure to listen to Friday's episode and also Monday's episode. For those who are new to this podcast, I try to keep each episode under 15 minutes long, just basically so that you have enough time to listen to it on your way to work. So let's start reading Genesis chapter 17, verse 15, and I am reading out of the NLT version today, but you can read out of whatever version you prefer. Then God said to Abraham, "Regarding Sarai, your wife, her name will no longer be Sarai. From now on, her name will be Sarah. And I will bless her and give you a son from her. Yes, I will bless her richly, and she will become the mother of many nations. Kings of nations will be among her descendants." Then Abraham bowed down to the ground, but he laughed to himself in disbelief. "How could I become a father at the age of 100, he thought, "and how can Sarah have a baby when she is 90 years old?" So Abraham said to God, "May Ishmael live under your special blessing." But God replied, "No, Sarah, your wife, will give birth to a son for you. You will name him Isaac, and I will confirm my covenant with him and his descendants as an everlasting covenant. As for Ishmael, I will bless him also, just as you have asked. I will make him extremely fruitful and multiply his descendants. He will become the father of 12 princes, and I will make him a great nation. But my covenant will be confirmed with Isaac, who will be born to you and Sarah about this time next year." When God had finished speaking, he left Abraham. On that very day, Abraham took his son Ishmael and every male in his household, including those born there and those he had bought. Then he circumcised them, cutting off their foreskins, just as God had told him. Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised, and Ishmael, his son, was 13. Both Abraham and his son Ishmael were circumcised on that very day, along with all the other men and boys of the household, whether they were born there or bought as servants, and all were circumcised with him. So, just a quick recap. God encounters Abraham. After 13 years, God had been relatively silent to Abraham, or at least it doesn't say in the Bible that God had spoken much to Abraham. And then when Abraham is 99 years old, God has an encounter with him. He renames Abram Abraham. So Abraham's old name was Abram, but God renamed him to fit what Abraham would be, because Abraham means the father of many nations. So God renames Abraham Abraham. That's a little confusing, the way I put that. And then he also tells Abraham that in order for this covenant or this promise to happen, he must be circumcised, and all of his descendants and everybody that lives in his house, all the males that live in his house, must be circumcised. And if you would have listened to Monday's episode, you would have heard why circumcision was an important thing for the health of the male and for producing more and more children, as God had promised Abraham that he would. And God says that this is going to be a reminder of my promise to you for generations and generations and generations. It's going to be my everlasting covenant. All you have to do is keep your end of the covenant, and I will keep my end of the covenant forever and ever and ever. And you know, now that I say that, humans have not kept their end of the covenant, but God always has. I just wanted to throw that out there. We have fallen short, but God has not. He has always kept up his side of this promise that he gave to Abraham, but humanity has not kept up their end of the bargain. So that's an interesting perspective that just came to me. So now in verse 15, God is talking to Abraham, and he's telling him about his wife, Sarah. So he's saying, regarding your wife Sarai, because her name was Sarai, he says, I'm going to rename her Sarah. And I looked up the two different meanings of names, and both mean princess. So Sarai meant princess. But now Sarah, they say that the dialect could mean a princess of many nations. So God names her not just princess, but princess of, the mother of nations. So it's a term of endearment, honestly, that he's giving to Sarai here. He's telling her, yes, you are going to be a princess of many nations. You are the mother of all these nations. And he says, not only am I going to bless her, but I'm going to bless her with a child in her old age. She's going to be blessed with a son, and you are going to be blessed with a son through her. And Abraham bows down to the ground and he laughs. He laughs in his heart, and he's like, ha ha ha, how could I possibly become the father of a son when I am 100 years old and Sarai is 90 years old? You've heard from previous episodes that I've done as to why people lived longer back then. This would have been very old, even in Abraham's time period. Nowadays, 100 years old would practically be a death sentence, but back then, Abraham still could have had a good 40 or 50 years left because people just lived longer. And, but he's saying here, I'm 100 years old. My wife is 90 years old, and she's definitely past her childbearing age. And how can I possibly have a child when I am 100 years old and my wife is 90? She's not going to be able to do that. And he laughs in his heart in disbelief of what God says. So then Abraham has the gall, I should say, to tell God, he says, may Ishmael live under your special blessing. So he's laughing in his heart, and then he says to God, please let Ishmael, my other son from a different woman, please let him live under your special blessing, and not this son that you say that Sarah is going to be able to have. But God replies, no. Sarah, your wife, will give birth to a son for you. And I find it interesting, whenever God refers to Sarah, he always says, your wife, or the wife of Abram. He always calls Sarah the wife. And the reason I find that interesting is because of the whole drama that had happened with Abram and that other woman with whom Ishmael was born. God had never said that that other woman was Abram's wife, even though culturally she would have been considered Abraham at this point, Abraham's second wife. But God did not acknowledge that. He said, Sarah is your wife, and she is the one who is going to give you a son. And God kind of made that clear from the beginning. I think I mentioned that I believe it was made clear because if you look at who God is, he has always wanted that special bond between man and woman since the very beginning when he created Adam and Eve in the garden. He always has wanted that special marriage bond. So he says, Sarah's going to give birth to a son for you, and you are going to name him Isaac. And do you know what Isaac means? I thought this was so hilarious. I actually didn't know this until today. Isaac means he laughed. And I found that so funny because God is just so snarky to Abraham here, because Abraham laughed in his heart that Sarah wouldn't be able to have this son. He tells Abraham to name his son, You Laughed, as a constant reminder to Abraham that I laughed. I didn't believe in God that he could give me this son. I found that so funny, and I'm sure some of you guys knew that. But to me, when I heard that God had told Abraham to name his son, He Laughs, like that just cracked me up so bad, because that is just so snarky. I love God, and his sense of humor is hilarious. So he tells Abraham, name your son Isaac, or He Laughs, and I will confirm my covenant with him and his descendants as an everlasting covenant. So he's repeating himself once again, saying, this is a promise I'm going to make for generation and generation and generation with your son Isaac. And he is going to produce many, many descendants. But then he does say, out of God's mercy and love for Abraham, and even that situation that Abraham got himself into where he impregnated another woman and produced Ishmael, his other son. God says, I have heard what you asked for Ishmael. I heard that you said, please put Ishmael under your special blessing, and I am going to. Ishmael does have a blessing. And he says, Ishmael is going to become the father of 12 princes, and he is going to become a great nation. But then he says, but my covenant is not with Ishmael. My covenant is going to be with your son, Isaac, who has not been born yet. Basically, he says, Sarah's going to have this baby next year. And that's it. And he leaves Abraham. So on that very same day that God leaves, Abraham goes back and he holds up his end of the covenant or the promise. And he ends up circumcising himself and his son Ishmael and everybody that lived in his household, just as God had asked him to do. And it says on that very day he did that. And everyone that lived with him, all the males that lived with him, I keep saying everyone, but women were not included in this. All the males that lived with Abraham were circumcised that very day, showing that Abraham trusted God and he believed in that covenant and in that promise and held up his end of the bargain. He showed his faith and love towards God. So we finished up Genesis chapter 17 today. Join me on Friday. We will be in Genesis chapter 18. And this chapter is really interesting to me because this is about Sodom and Gomorrah. So join me on Friday to talk a little bit about Sodom and Gomorrah. It's going to be pretty interesting. So join me then, 6 a.m. Now, if you like what I do here at P40 Ministries and you want to support this podcast, please go to www.p40ministries.com/shop and you can pick up your P40 Ministries t-shirt today. Definitely take a look at some of the brand new designs I've got in the store. I have some Christmas designs that I think are super cute. I ordered one for myself, I'm not gonna lie. So definitely take a look at those. And thank you guys so much for always tuning in and listening each and every morning. I hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your day and happy listening, and God bless.